Are you struggling with diabetes? If you are, then you need to watch our two-part series on reversing diabetes. Today, we are going to delve into this important and impactful topic, and it's basically how a plant-based diet can actually help to reverse diabetes. How does that sound? So, we are going to explore the science behind diabetes. We're going to share some practical tips and hear some inspiring stories from individuals who actually were able to transform their health by adopting a plant based lifestyle. All right, so let's get started. All right. So I thought the first thing that we would do is talk about what diabetes is. And I'm going to start with the fact that there are two types of diabetes. There is type 1 and then there is type 2 diabetes. So type 1 has been called the juvenile diabetes. Certainly that's what it was called before. And it's basically, they feel it's an autoimmune condition. So the body's immune system is attacking and destroying the insulin producing cells in the pancreas. And so when you have type 1 diabetes, you are producing little insulin. And they don't know the exact cause. There's a lot of theories of genetic and environmental factors that may come into play with type 1 diabetes. And it's typically thought to be non reversible. However, I have seen for sure at least one case of somebody who did go on a plant-based, a whole food plant-based lifestyle, similar to what we are going to talk about on our second part of this series. And they were able to reduce the amount of insulin that they needed to take. Not saying they reversed it, but they could reduce the amount of insulin they needed to take. So it's not out of the realistic realm to actually say, oh, I'm just throwing in the towel. I have type 1 diabetes. You can impact your health still with a whole food plant-based lifestyle. Now, type 2 diabetes is really referred to, it's the most common, and it is currently or typically referred to as a lifestyle disease. It's primarily impacted by our lifestyle factors. There is a little bit of play on genetics, but we'll talk about that because lifestyle is really, for most people, is going to trump any genetics that they have. And it typically occurs when the body becomes resistant to insulin or the pancreas cannot produce enough insulin to maintain normal glucose levels. And hey, I'm sure you've heard the term insulin resistant or resistance. It's I think a term that's out there quite a bit. So I want to delve into what that is. So we'll start by looking at the factors that do contribute to type 2 diabetes. We'll start, hey, insulin resistance is there. So I'm going to dive into this a little bit further because I wanted to understand it better myself. Because, you know, to me, it's a little bit of a buzzword that you hear out there. And a lot of times they'll say, you might hear from doctors and you hear on different um, uh, things about the insulin resistance and also pre-diabetes, which is kind of where it starts. And all of this applies to both pre-diabetes and actual type 2 diabetes. Uh, and so the insulin resistance actually happens when you have a buildup of glucose in the blood that actually cannot be absorbed into the cells to gain energy for the cells. And so over time, the pancreas starts overproducing insulin and can't keep up to the demand, and then you end up with high blood sugar levels. Now, genetics can play a role in diabetes. It's something that you may have a history of diabetes, which could increase your risk of type 2 diabetes. But the biggest thing is the lifestyle factors often are the triggers to the onset of diabetes. If you are predisposed to diabetes from a family or cultural um, point of view. Now, and this is where our lifestyle becomes a factor. And so, is it the lifestyle or the genetics? And sometimes it's hard to tell which it is, but certainly genetics does play a role. But our epigenetics, which is all those lifestyle things, are definitely an important factor to keep in mind. So, obesity as well is a factor for type 2 diabetes, especially if you are carrying extra weight around your abdomen. And that is a major risk factor for developing type 2 diabetes. Basically, our fat cells will release inflammatory substances that can lead to insulin resistance. And as we age, unfortunately, this is where when we gain weight as we age, we tend to pack the pounds on in the middle instead of all over the body. And I can attest to that, unfortunately, because that's as I got older, I gained a bit of weight during COVID, and because I stopped doing all my exercise, I was no longer going to the gym and the yoga studio and walking to and from work. And lo and behold, I gained some weight. And unfortunately, it all went on in the middle. So that gives me an idea of my age. Anyway, so this is also something to keep in mind. Lack of physical activity can also contribute to insulin resistance and weight gain. And these are both going to increase your risk of diabetes. A poor diet. So if your diet is kind of a standard American diet or the Western diet, and by the way, a standard American diet applies to us in Canada, and it also applies to a lot of European countries, the Western kind of diet. That is one that is high in processed foods, sugary beverages, unhealthy fats, and all of these contribute to both obesity and insulin resistance. And so we want to look at a diet that is high in fiber as well. So if your diet is low in fiber and is actually high in refined carbohydrates, which is what you get in your processed foods, then that can spike your blood sugar and strain your pancreas. And then age is another factor. As we get older, it could be loss of muscle mass, less physical activity, and weight gain. All of those things can, as we get older, like I said, as you get older, you tend to if you're putting on weight, tends to be in the middle. So all of these things, as you age, become a greater risk for developing diabetes. Now, some other factors are hormones and hormonal changes. One of the ones that I know I think they test automatically for is if you're pregnant, that you could end up with gestational diabetes because of the changes in your hormones. But if you do have gestational diabetes, you actually have a higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes later in life. Chronic stress affects our blood sugar levels. Our stress hormones like cortisol can increase our blood glucose levels and promote insulin resistance. And we're talking chronic stress where just all the time we're in a bad stress. And if you are getting a poor quality sleep, if you have some sleep disorder or just not getting enough sleep, that is also linked to insulin resistance and the risk of type 2 diabetes. All right. So lots of different things that can influence the type 2 diabetes. All right. And one of the other things I just want to say, because I am reminded of a story that I was working with a client, and I met this person that was a former employee of the client that I was working with, and his whole life spiraled because of diabetes. And he basically was, working a lot of hours, not getting a lot of sleep. And because he was working hard and so much, he was eating a lot of fast food. And guess what? Fast food comes into that poor diet for the most part. It's not a lot of healthy fast foods out there. There's, you can get some, but it's not a lot. And I don't think he was eating the healthier versions. And he just wasn't paying attention to the warning signs of his health, and ended up, his family found him in a diabetic coma in his house. He lived alone, and he took a long time to recover from that incident that he had. So it really, if you aren't going for checkups and not kind of getting those regular blood checkups and blood work and stuff, this is something that can really become a big issue over time. And I don't think that was very fun. It was very devastating for him, that whole process. All right. So now let's talk about insulin resistance, and we'll start by what is normal insulin function. All right. So I have here what I've depicted for normal insulin function. So when you are healthy, your insulin binds to receptors on your cell surfaces, and that signals to the cell to take in glucose. And so this is what keeps our blood sugar balanced. So in my little blood cell here, or my blood vessel, I have some glucose running around. They're the little white molecules in this blood. And then there are insulin molecules as well. And what happens in my cell down at the bottom has these little things that look like people or Ys. That's our insulin receptors. And what happens is the insulin binds to the insulin receptor. And then once it's bound there, the glucose has a pathway and it primes the glucose to be taken in by the cell. So that whole process is how we get the glucose into the cell. And the glucose basically provides fuel for our cells to survive. All right. So that is what happens normally. So what happens if we are insulin resistant? So basically the cells are less receptive to and less responsive to the hormone, the insulin hormone that's made in the pancreas. And we basically are not able to get that glucose into our cells. So when we look at insulin resistance, we basically, usually we have these excess of fat cells here. So this is probably mostly visceral fat that's around our abdomen. And what that does is it releases these inflammatory substances, which are these little green blobs in my diagram. And so they block the receptors, those little Ys. They go in front of that and they block it so that the insulin is unable to um, um, get attached to the cell and the insulin receptors. And then there's no mechanism there for the glucose to get into the cell. And so now you can see what's happening is that there's a buildup of glucose in the blood. And of course, when there starts to be a buildup of glucose, our pancreas will produce more insulin. So we make more insulin. And so that it keeps kind of like a little bit of a vicious circle. And eventually our blood sugar will get higher because the glucose isn't getting into the cell. So we're producing more insulin. And at some point, we can't, the pancreas can't keep up with that. And eventually what happens is that we end up with type 2 diabetes. And more, that's basically the higher glucose in our blood cells. And so then the blood sugar remains elevated at that point. And so this is really important to understand this for managing I guess, and potentially reversing type 2 diabetes. And it's not just about lowering your blood sugar that you're taking in. I know, I guess it's a myth that I grew up with is that diabetes is caused by eating too much sugar. And a lot of people were thinking at the time that the way to keep your blood sugar down was not to have anything with a lot of sugar in it, and not eating a lot of fruits and really minding your sugars and minding your carbs and eating a low carb diet. But it's more than that. It's about reducing the inflammation and the fat levels to help improve the insulin sensitivity. And so this is where our plant-based diet, which is rich in fiber and low in unhealthy fats, can play a crucial role in the process. And I also want to say that I do know people who are eating plant-based. So it's not just about plant-based, it's whole food plant-based, because I do know and have a friend who is plant-based, but not eating healthy plant-based and has diabetes as well. So it's not just about that. And so the last thing I wanted to talk about today is the effects of diabetes on your health and what those long-term effects, because you can take medications and you can take insulin to keep your blood sugar levels in check. But I think it's important to understand that there are potential long-term health impacts, especially if we are not controlling or poorly managing the diabetes. And and it's a slippery slope, because as you get into it more and more, you may need to increase your medication. You may need to go on insulin. So it can get kind of further and further into the medications and the drugs to keep the diabetes under control, which is why I like the whole idea of getting to the source and changing lifestyle. Okay, so cardiovascular disease. So people with diabetes are at a higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease. So the high blood sugar levels can damage the blood vessels and the nerves that control the heart. And it also leads to an increased risk of heart attack, stroke, and hardening of the arteries, which is arteriosclerosis. It also leads to can lead to hypertension or high blood pressure, which also puts you at a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. And my understanding is people typically don't die from diabetes. They end up dying from a heart attack or heart disease before the diabetes actually will kill them. So that tends to be kind of the standard or a typical route. There's also neuropathy, which your high blood sugar can damage your nerves, especially in your legs and feet. This can lead to pain, tingling sensation, or a loss of sensation. And once you get to severe nerve damage, that you're going to result in injuries that go unnoticed, that can lead to infections and even amputations. You can also have autonomic nerve system damage. And these are the things that control our digestion, our bladder control, and our heart rate. And so if we end up with problems with neuropathy in our nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, then that can lead to urinary issues, abnormal heart rates, and digestive problems. You can also have kidney damage. I think diabetes is the leading cause of chronic kidney disease and kidney failure. And high blood sugar levels can damage the filtering units in the kidneys, and they lead to protein leakage into the urine and eventually to kidney failure. And you may end up on dialysis and or need a kidney transplant at that point. Eye damage is also very common in diabetes. Basically, the damage to the blood vessels in the retina leads to diabetic retinopathy, and that causes visual problems and also can lead to blindness. And there's other eye conditions like cataracts and glaucoma are more common in people with diabetes. You could end up with foot complications. So you can end up with ulcers and infections in your feet. I think, we talked about the reduced blood flow, and the nerve damage in the feet can lead to these infections and ulcers. And they're often hard and slow to heal. And so that can lead to severe infections like gangrene. And then again, once you get to that stage, then you need to amputate. And one of the things that is really important is regular foot care and monitoring your condition. I know there's special socks for people with diabetes. And I did have a friend who had diabetes and spent a lot of time continually wiggling his toes just to make sure his circulation was continuing. So if you can prevent all that, that would be better for sure. You can have skin conditions like skin infections, bacterial and fungal infections. And then you can end up with light brown scaly patches, which are called diabetic dermopathy. And it can also lead to cognitive decline. So there's growing evidence that diabetes increases your risk for cognitive decline and also Alzheimer's disease. So the high blood sugar levels damages the brain cells and the blood vessels within your brain. So while you can manage your blood sugar levels with medication and insulin, it's also, I think, for me, in my truth, it's important to address the root causes. And so look at taking a comprehensive approach to managing your diabetes. And you can see that the long-term effects can be fairly life-threatening to your body, and certainly. And I want to tell you a story about this is I'm writing a book, and this is going to be in my book. And I want to tell you a story about a colleague of mine from my corporate job and her situation. So she lost her father suddenly, and it really hit home to me when she told me her story. Her father wasn't in good health, but nobody was expecting him to die suddenly. They all thought they had more time with him, and he had diabetes. Over the years, the impacts became very constraining on his health. He had lost his foot on one leg, and then he lost some toes on the other foot. And then, unfortunately, he had to have a further toe amputation. And his kidneys were damaged from the stress of the diabetes. And every time he had an operation, the stress further degraded his health even more. It was like a bouncing ball. The first bounce was high, but each subsequent bounce was a little bit smaller and smaller until the last. Eventually, he passed away of what was suspected to be a heart attack. He was alone, and when he didn't answer the family's texts and calls, his two sons, who were only 23, went over to his house to find him. This traumatic was a very traumatic experience for his sons to have to deal with. And as my colleague retold the story, what really hit me really clearly was that his diabetes impacted him by shortening his life, but it also had a big impact on his family. Our food choices are not only impacting us as individuals, but our family and our loved ones. And I'm sure they would have liked to have had more time with their father. And so that really actually even today to listen and read that makes me sad about what his family went through and he went through. But I want to end on a good note, all right? So that's what can happen, but we can do something about it. And I want to tell you Patricia's story to end with. So this is Patricia's story. Prior to going plant-based, my diet consisted mostly of fatty fried food that I quickly grabbed on my lunch breaks. Dinner was anything I could cook up quickly, always in some form of animal protein as the main course. Sounds like Patricia had a pretty busy life. Can you relate to that? On December 24th, 2021, I had an appointment with a hepatologist arranged by my primary care physician after blood work revealed that my liver enzymes were at cosmic range. The hepatologist ordered more tests, and the results showed that I had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which was likely the result of a nasty gene in my family. So it was genetic. Imagining the imaging showed an median liver stiffness score of 13.2, which indicated severe fibrosis and sclerosis of the liver. I was also obese, had type 2 diabetes with an A1C level of 7, and had high cholesterol. The doctor told me that if I did not change my diet and sedentary lifestyle, I would be a candidate for a liver transplant within 3 to 6 years. Well, that was a lovely Christmas present. When I told one of my stepdaughters the news, she told me to watch the documentary Forks Over Knife. And I highly recommend, if you haven't seen Forks Over Knife, to watch it. I think it's still on Netflix, but you can Google and find it. So I did 3 times. After that, I immediately became vegan. My focus was on repairing and keeping my liver healthy. I was pleasantly surprised. Within a few weeks of my new diet, I found myself losing weight. As for my liver, I went for another checkup in April 2022. The imaging showed a much improved liver stiffness score of 4.3. The imaging in March 2023 showed a liver stiffness score of 3.7, and my most recent image in January 2024 showed a liver stiffness of 2.7, which indicates no significant fibrosis or normal inflammation. It has been more than 2 years since I adopted a healthy vegan diet. Along the way, I have lost 35 pounds and needed to get a new wardrobe and reversed my diabetes with my most recent blood work showing an A1C of 5.6, which is in the normal range. I've lowered my cholesterol to normal range as well, and I did it all with a plant-based diet, which, by the way, is delicious. Because I've never met a vegetable or spice I didn't like, I really enjoyed making stews and soups from spices from North Africa, India, Asia, and Central America. And there are some really great vegan cookbooks out there. To minimize my exposure to toxic chemicals, I also stopped coloring my hair. I am so grateful to my stepdaughter for telling me to watch Forks Over Knives. I no longer have the fear of living with liver failure, transplant surgery, or having any immunosuppressant drugs to take over the rest of my life. And I tell everyone who asks me how I did it to watch Forks Over Knife. For me, food is medicine. So, as a dear friend says, I am self medicating. And it is possible to reverse our diabetes and other chronic diseases. So, on that note, I will stop for today and ask if there are any questions.
I don't have any questions. I really do enjoy the show today. I like the fact that it talks about the side effects and the symptoms of diabetes, and I could I could remember I once had a neighbor that had diabetes, and the signs we noticed was that he had a sore on his leg which wasn't healing. He's used many kinds of medications for the sore, but it wasn't healing. Eventually, they had to amputate the leg, and unfortunately, he didn't survive it. So it boils down to his diet. His kid started telling us that he consumes lots of sugar on a daily basis. He takes soda, he takes soft drinks that contains a lot of sugar. So it was his lifestyle growing up that actually affected him in his old age. So
Mhm.
this this topic today on the show resonated with me a lot because I've seen people with this kind of condition, and some were able to come out of it, but some couldn't. So
Yeah,
I would say thank you for sharing this.
you're welcome. And it is a very common. And the other thing that's very troubling is that diabetes is used to be affecting people as they got into middle age.
Yeah,
Because their diet would kind of catch up with them. However,
that's
now
right.
they're finding more and more children, and it's coming younger and younger that people are being diagnosed with diabetes. And it's very serious if if you don't get diagnosed. And a lot of people walk around without even realizing that they have diabetes. So I guess that's another one to watch for if you've got, sores. I had a friend of mine was diagnosed with diabetes, and what kind of came up for her that got her to go see the doctor was she kept having the same kind of thing. She was having skin rashes that just wouldn't go away. And so she went to see her doctor, and I don't think she had ever thought in her life that that would be the reason why she was having a skin rash. She thought maybe it was allergic reaction, but here it was diabetes. Very sombering for sure. But tomorrow we are going to talk about how we can avoid and reverse diabetes. And I want to also say we are getting ready for our 14-day Kickstart program where we are going to get you started on that lifestyle that can help you to reverse your chronic disease, reverse the diabetes, and gain energy and just feel a lot better. So if I've got the link in the comments in the chat where you can reach us and sign up for our 14-day Kickstart program, which is starting on Monday, June the 17th. But this is something that we are going to continue to run ongoing every month because it's so important to just get that start to a healthier diet. And on that note, we will say goodbye for today. And we will see you tomorrow as we talk more about how we can deal with diabetes.